Tonight, Republicans have described Ocasio-Cortez as the leader of her party, as the boss of the Democratic Party. And there's a reason that they're saying that, because she is. And she said so herself in an interview on Friday. Watch this.
Oh, it's unrealistic. Oh, it's vague. Oh, it doesn't address this little minute thing. And I'm like, you try. You do it. Because you're not. Because you're not. So until you do it, I'm the boss. How about that?
She's the boss. So how did this happen? Well, for the last 2 years, Democrats have been very distracted. They have spent all of their time hating Donald Trump and none of their time thinking about what they would do if they ever took charge, as he just did of the Congress last November. So they arrive in Washington in January and they have no idea what to do. Lucky for them, someone had a plan. She was a 29-year-old bartender from the Bronx, and she showed up with a brand new Democratic platform already written. She imposed it on her party. It's called the Green New Deal. And in less than 2 months, she has basically convinced the entire leadership of the Democratic Party to buy into this plan, to ratify it. It's a perfect plan. It would shut down the entire American economy except for the hedge funds that fund Democratic campaigns. Absolutely perfect. There's only one downside. The plan, if enacted, would cost, some estimate, more than the entire global GDP. Not the GDP of the United States, but the GDP of the world. It's pretty expensive. But it doesn't bother Ocasio-Cortez at all. She doesn't care. Listen to her describe her reaction to the bean counter's description of this is too expensive. Here's what she says in response.
Our planet is going to face disaster if we don't turn this ship around. And so it's basically like there's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question. You know, is it okay to still have children?
Is it okay to still have children? Well, I don't know, Alexandria. Can we? You're the boss now. If you say we can't reproduce the species, of course we won't. It's your call. My gosh. It's a measure of how cowardly and passive everyone's become all of a sudden that a chorus of right-thinking Democrats hasn't told this idiotic windbag to be quiet and take a seat. Don't talk until you learn something. But, of course, nobody's done that. They're all too afraid of her. What you're watching isn't politics. It's a children's crusade, an army of tiny combatants marching off in oversized clothes into an unknown, puffed up with ignorant self-righteousness. Last week, as if on cue, activists showed up with a group of kids to harass California Senator Dianne Feinstein for the crime of not endorsing the Green New Deal. Watch.
Some scientists have said that we have 12 years to turn this around.
Well, it's not going to get turned around in 10 years. What we can do,
Senator, if this doesn't get turned around in 10 years, you're looking at the faces of the people who are going to be living with these consequences.
The government is supposed to be for the people and by the people and all for the people.
You know what's interesting about this group is I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I'm doing. You come in here and you say it has to be my way or the highway. I don't respond to that.
Any plan that doesn't take bold, transformative action is not going to be what we need.
Well, you know better than I do. So I think one day you should run for the Senate.
You almost feel a little bad for Dianne Feinstein. This is not the politics that she joined. When Dianne Feinstein became a U.S. Senator 27 years ago, the Democratic Party was still sort of tethered to reality. They cared about the middle class, or said they did. They wanted a secure border. Dianne Feinstein made that case herself. They said they wanted abortion to be legal, but at least they said they also wanted it to be rare. They never told you not to have children. Dianne Feinstein is 85 now. She is not the future of the Democratic Party. Comrade Ocasio-Cortez is the future. She may be arrogant and dumb, but at one point she's absolutely right. She is the boss. Josh Holmes is a former chief of staff and campaign manager for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He was recently accused by Ocasio-Cortez of running a, quote, multi-million-dollar operation to have bot accounts manipulate online discourse. There's no evidence for that claim, and Ocasio-Cortez later deleted the tweet. Josh Holmes joins us tonight. Josh, thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Tucker.
Where did first to the specifics of your experience with Ocasio-Cortez, where did the idea that you ran a multi-million-dollar bot farm come from, do you think?
I mean, look, your guess is as good as mine. I actually have absolutely no idea. I would love to know the fever swamps that this conspiracy came from, but I'm afraid I'll probably never know. But I think it actually touches upon what your lead-in is, in that she is so uncomfortable with the idea that there are people who disagree with her, so uncomfortable with the idea that there are conservatives walking the planet, that the idea that there's any traffic online, anybody who could disagree with something as sacred as the Green New Deal, certainly must be bought and paid for and totally corrupt by some Republican out there like me.
This is kind of what Democrats deserve, though, after spending 2 years not mentioning what they might be for, an affirmative case for their views, a program for America, instead focusing on Trump. I mean, she just filled a void.
Yeah, that's entirely right, and I'm glad that you're covering that. It is really easy to look at somebody who's milling about their kitchen, espousing the absolutely crazy views that she espouses on a night-to-night basis. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but what she's coming up with is crazy. But it's not that crazy in the context of the Democratic Party, because as you saw, she rolls out the Green New Deal. The next thing you know, we've got 2020 candidates on the record that are all of a sudden coming out in favor of banning cows. I mean, this kind of lunacy is now becoming mainstream in Democratic politics, and if we don't take it seriously, I'll be darned if we're not going to wake up and half this country is going to be endorsing those kind of things. We got to fight for it.
Well, I think that's exactly right. It's foolish to sit back and just laugh and, oh, how stupid this is. I mean, I think if she were 35, I think she could be president. But I'm just struck by how easy it was for her to take over the Democratic Party. I mean, there's basically been no resistance. Nobody has been brave enough. Even Senator Feinstein, who's 85, what does she care? No one has stood up and said, you know what, you don't know anything, you're arrogant and dumb, please be quiet. Why will no one say that?
Yeah, well, I think you got a combination of problems. I think the first problem is that you've seen the leadership of the Democratic Party largely confined to septuagenarians who have been so out of touch with the American people for so long that the base of the Democratic Party is looking for something new. She's seen that, and she's seized upon that to try to drive this wedge that, you know, started developing in the Sanders campaign, honestly, against almost a generational battle within her party. The difference is what she's come up with, and the views that she's espousing here are incredibly dangerous. I mean, a restructuring of the economy, the likes of which we've never seen before, tearing down every building in America and replacing them with some new green dream, a $93 trillion deal. Well, I mean, here's the problem, is that they're all saying they're going to vote for it. Right? I'm glad Mitch McConnell is actually going to put this sucker on the Senate floor, so at very least we can see the 2020 Democrats who are running for president come down and be counted, because you know darn well when they get to Ohio in a general election, they're not going to want any part of this deal.
No, I mean, it's a pure Democratic takeover of the U.S. economy. It's just so interesting. I mean, you worked in the Senate. There must be Democratic senators who think that this is unwise and dangerous to their party. Why aren't they saying anything?
Absolutely. Well, you saw with Dianne Feinstein why they're not, right? I mean, here's a senator who dared question the idea that we don't ruin the Democratic or the entire American economy, and she's shouted down by a bunch of children. And by the way, there were calls all over California for her to resign for that. I mean, this is the modern-day Democratic Party. I saw it personally with AOC attacking me. You see Democratic senators, if they dare question this wisdom, being shouted down by AOC's 3 million followers online, which, by the way, facts be darned, they're going to absolutely attack no matter what. And it's a really dangerous place for Democrats who have any sort of wherewithal these days.
Josh, thanks for that. That was smart and interesting.
Thank you, Tucker.
Appreciate it. Well, Democratic presidential candidates claim that climate change is an existential threat to all humanity, a matter of life and death for every person on this planet, nothing less than that.
That climate change is real, is an existential threat to our country and the entire planet.
The biggest threat to our prosperity in this 21st century is climate change.
And if we don't have the bravery and the courage and the heart and the determination to take it on as the most important challenge of our lifetime, then we don't care about those children.
Climate change is an existential threat to us as human beings.
The threat is real and it is existential, and we need to take action now.
So they say it a lot. They demand that you repeat it. They require that you believe it. They attack you if you don't. Any evidence of doubt makes you a denier. But do they themselves believe it? That's an interesting question and rarely asked. When he was campaigning for Hillary Clinton in 2016, Bernie Sanders repeatedly demanded private jet access for himself and his entourage. Over the past 3 years, according to a report in Politico, Sanders has spent almost $350,000 on private flights. How can you justify that if you believe the world is ending because of climate change? Adam Green is co-founder of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, and he joins us today. Adam, thanks very much for coming on.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you.
So it's really simple. If you say you believe that carbon emissions are destroying the planet and making it impossible for people to live here, and people shouldn't have kids because this threat is so imminent and so profound, how could you possibly ever, under any circumstances, fly in a private aircraft?
Yeah, Tucker, I've seen you make enough good arguments to not really think that you think that's a very strong one. I mean, Bernie Sanders is thinking about a world...
Don't belittle the argument. Why don't you explain why it's wrong?
I am.
Okay.
Just like you wouldn't blame your viewers who aspire to a better job in the future for going to work every day and call them hypocrites now, you can't blame Bernie Sanders for supporting a world 10 years from now with less carbon emissions, but taking an airplane now. Those two things are not in contrast with each other.
No.
In fact, he would be a hypocrite if he was not campaigning around the country.
No, stop. No, you're misrepresenting what I said. Taking a private plane. Now, you know the numbers on carbon emissions per passenger, private versus commercial. There's almost nothing you can do short of starting a tire fire to cause a bigger carbon footprint than to fly private. So why in the world, if you believe that, why would you? No, not come on. Don't BS me. Don't make excuses for this guy. Hold him to the standards you expect the rest of us to live to. Why are you giving him a pass?
No, it's interesting to say BS, because I've seen you, tear down people for making BS arguments. I know this is not the strongest argument against the New Deal.
What's BS about that? I don't understand. No, it's a sincere argument.
Here's what Bernie said today. Let me tell you what Bernie said today.
You guys don't believe a word you say. You want to take over the U.S. economy so you can control it.
Over 2 years,
you don't believe it's an imminent crisis.
Tucker, between 2017 and 2018, there was one 9-day spurt where Bernie Sanders went on a 9-day tour and took a private jet, and for the rest of the 2 years, he went commercials. This is not a real issue. You don't believe this.
But why would he ever do it at all? If this is a moral issue, hold on, this is a moral issue. You guys have framed this not as a matter of science. Anyone who doubts is a denier because they're immoral. So why in the world would you do this? Because it's not a big deal, or it is a big deal? Which?
What would be hypocritical if he believed that Democrats were going to pass things that would save the world is for him not to campaign hard in the final 9 months or 9 weeks, 9 days for Democrats who are going to do stuff. Like, you're basically saying that,
how many houses
does
he have?
But he has, I don't know, how many does he have? He has one in Burlington. Okay, so what's your point?
3. Okay, so my point is that if you believe that carbon emissions are destroying the Earth, that's too many houses, that's too much consumption, that's too much carbon. You lead by example. Why is it the people who are trying to control my life and tell me what I can do and can't do and how many kids I can have don't bother to restrain themselves?
Again.
No, it's not silly. It's true.
It's silly. It's a fake hypocrisy argument. You're basically saying that, if you believe that Facebook has bad privacy policies, you shouldn't check Facebook every day. If you believe you want a better job, you shouldn't go to work
I'm saying if you think adultery is wrong, don't cheat on your wife.
If you believe in having a better economy
you attack other people
with tens of millions of jobs in the future in clean energy, of course he should spend the last few days of a campaign doing everything he can to fight for a Green New Deal.
You should reduce your own emissions. No, it's really simple.
So
you should reduce your own emissions.
Should he walk from Vermont to D.C.?
Yes.
Should he walk from Vermont to D.C.? You just said yes. You just said yes, he should walk from Vermont to D.C.? That shows the BS argument that you just described.
Okay.
Taking a car.
What you're doing? You are making excuses because all you want is power. You're exactly the kind of person who would.
Tucker, I've seen you make better arguments than saying that he should walk from Vermont to D.C.
You're exposing the shallowness of your own argument.
Anybody who takes any plane.
This is idiotic.
Is it idiotic? You just said he should walk from Vermont to D.C. Obviously, you don't believe that. Obviously, you don't believe that. He's not a hypocrite for doing that. He believes in tens of millions of new jobs in the clean energy economy.
This is idiotic what you're saying because look, you will
just
never
said he should walk from Vermont to DC.
Or your leaders.
You just said he should walk from Vermont to DC. I asked if he should walk. You said yes. Come on, not a real argument.
You got me, Adam. You got me. You're a brilliant guy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're gonna we have pictures apparently on the screen. Kim Jong-un's train pulling in. into victim of a modern-day attempted lynching. Smollett's hoax fell apart in the end, but only barely, partly because he was completely incompetent. He paid by check, for example. But if he hadn't been incompetent, he would still be considered a victim. He would be a hero because victimhood is power. Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, meanwhile, has certainly learned that lesson. Fairfax is accused of sexually assaulting 2 separate women in the early 2000s. Instead of simply defending himself against those charges, Fairfax is taking the offensive by becoming offended. He isn't a victimizer, he's telling us. He's a victim, too, and therefore holy in a way. Criticizing him, he said yesterday in a speech at the Capitol in Virginia, is like trying to lynch someone more than a century ago. Watch this.
I've heard much about anti-lynching on the floor of this very Senate, where people were not given any due process whatsoever. Yet we stand here in a rush to judgment with nothing but accusations and no facts. And we decide that we are willing to do the same thing.
It's really a lot like lynching. Now, under normal circumstances, anyone who said something like that would be laughed off the stage. But this is 2019, and the cult of victimhood is at its peak, and so it might actually work. The same feminist groups and politicians that hounded Brett Kavanaugh for weeks have barely said anything about Fairfax at all. Now that he's compared them to a lynch mob, they won't say anything. You watch. Well, we warned you last week in this program that Jussie Smollett did not invent hate crimes. In the past few years, they've actually become alarmingly common. The overwhelming majority of so-called hate crimes that have received national attention have turned out to be false, at least the ones we could check. Another example just come out of Jackson, Michigan. The home of transgender activist Nikki Jolly burned down in 2017. It was a horrible fire. You may remember it. It killed all 5 of his pets. At first, the fire was considered a hate crime and investigated as such. Now, police say Jolly is the one who started the fire. According to his friends, he was upset that a recent gay rights parade hadn't sparked protests. Jackson, Michigan, it turned out, is not a very hateful place, so hatred had to be created. Seeing a theme here? Yes, you are. So is Bradley Campbell. He's a sociologist and author of the book, The Rise of Victimhood Culture. He joins us tonight. Mr. Campbell, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Are you surprised by this? It seems like our society has created a pretty strong incentive to create fake hate crimes.
I'm not surprised by it. I've been interested in hate crime hoaxes for a long time now, and I've been following them. And it's not that, of course, hate crimes are more common than hate crime hoaxes, and they're a problem. But it is interesting that so many of the cases that do get a lot of public attention and media attention do turn out to be hoaxes. And I first started seeing these things mainly on college campuses. And now with the Jussie Smollett case, if that turns out to be as police are alleging, this will be the most famous hate crime hoax, and obviously not on a college campus. So it seems that some of the cultural things that are enabling hate crime hoaxes, enabling their success, might be spreading from college campuses to other areas of society. And I don't think it's that surprising. People lie about all kinds of things. There are all kinds of hoaxes and con artist scams and things like that. People will lie when it benefits them to do so, or at least some people will, not most people, but some people will lie when there's a benefit to it and when the lie will be believed. And so we have to understand what is the context in which these kinds of things provide some kind of benefit and in which they're believed. Right. And so if it's a matter, if people are given a kind of status for victimhood, and that's what my co-author and I argued in our book, that a new victimhood culture was arising, first among activists on college campuses, and then it began to spread elsewhere, where victimhood came to act as a kind of status. If you're perceived as a victim of oppression, you're treated differently, and the idea is that you should have a different kind of credibility. So when people make claims about oppression, then often it's thought that there's a moral imperative to believe them. And that makes these kinds of hoaxes more successful, and also provides people then attract sympathy and fame and support, so it might give them individual benefits and also help them advance a political cause.
Yeah. Grotesque and sad, and we're going to see more of it for exactly the reasons that you just outlined. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Kim Jong-un of North Vietnam is arriving in Vietnam by train. maybe not surprisingly, Ed Henry is in Hanoi for us tonight, and he joins us now. Hey, Ed.
Tucker, good to see you. One of the many reasons Kim Jong-un is such a complicated negotiating partner is the level of mystery around his every move. We see him just arriving where I am in Hanoi a moment ago. It's a state secret, for example, though, as to which hotel he's going to be staying at here. There are, of course, legitimate security concerns for any leader, but the North Koreans are especially paranoid because of his precarious hold on power. Remember, he's killed some of his own relatives to hold power. There were decoy planes that left Pyongyang when Kim came to Singapore some months ago for round one of the summit. That was to decrease the chances of an attack on him. The dictator travels, you won't believe this, with his own toilet, presumably not kept in the overhead compartment. The potentate's portable potty has a purpose. Kim does not want intel agencies in Singapore or now here in Vietnam to get a stool sample that would give the U.S. and others clues about his health, his longevity, again, his hold on power. He's also scared of being poisoned, so he travels with his own food. In fact, I have a source who was in the room where President Trump dined with Kim and his entire team back in Singapore last June. This person checked the plates after all the dignitaries left. All of the American plates were basically clean. They had eaten. Every single North Korean plate, I was told, was totally full, untouched. They apparently did not trust the food. They were worried about poison or something else. So what we know about Kim's preps this time for Hanoi, he's been on that yellow and green train you just saw him get off of. It was a 2-day, roughly 2,800-mile trek through China into Vietnam, perhaps to retrace the journey of his grandfather, who took a train for several trips to Vietnam some decades ago. That train is, of course, armored. But it may not just be about family ties and security that he went train instead of plane. His jet is old Soviet-era technology. His pilots are not that experienced, so he borrowed a jet from the Chinese, for example, to get to Singapore last June, Tucker.
It's really out of another time. Ed Henry for us in Hanoi, Vietnam. Thanks very much, Ed.
Good to see you.
Meanwhile, the release of the Mueller report could be just days away. Not sure if it's accurate or not, but in Washington, it's widely believed that the Mueller investigation may be waiting for the president to return from abroad. We'll find out. But it's a good time in any case to consider what we've learned from this investigation over the past 2 years, and we'll consider that after the break. The Mueller investigation filed a memorandum that was more than 800 pages long. That's a good thing, says MSNBC, because Manafort needs to go away for a long time. National security and public safety are at stake.
There's such a wealth of information about Paul Manafort in the public domain that I don't think we quite need the Mueller report to see that information. What we need are indictments. We need people like Manafort to be put behind bars as a matter of national security and as a matter of public safety.
Behind bars for life. Lobbying for the Ukrainians makes you dangerous. But if that's the case, why is Tony Podesta still free? We'll be waiting a long time to find an answer to that question, we assume. Meanwhile, the Mueller investigation itself could be ending very soon. It's still unclear if the final report will be made public. But Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, says a legal challenge is inevitable if it's not.
Well, we will obviously subpoena the report. We will bring Bob Mueller in to testify before Congress. We will take it to court if necessary. I think there will be immense pressure not only on the department but on the Attorney General to be forthcoming.
You're talking about public pressure. You prepared to take the administration to court?
Absolutely. We are going to get to the bottom of this. We are going to share this information with the public, and if the president is serious about all of his claims of exoneration, then he should welcome the publication of this report.
Richard Goodstein is an attorney and former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, and she joins us tonight. Richard, thanks a lot for coming on. Let me ask you a macro question just to begin. All the Russia stuff, Manafort, Trump, was he a spy, all this stuff, it's completely dominated the conversation for 2 years, occupied all the disk space of the Democratic Party. And what hasn't happened is any kind of Democratic program getting created or explained to the public. Into that vacuum comes Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and basically takes over your party. And I know that deep down you must hate that because she's obviously a lunatic, and I know you think that. So looking back, wouldn't it have been smarter to just run the party like a real political party instead of wasting all this time with the Russia nonsense?
Democrats picked up 40 seats and won the national vote by 8 or 9%, Tucker. having zero to do with anything that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said last fall. It was because of health care and because of disgust with Donald Trump and the need to have a check on him through a Democratic House. That's why the Democrats won, and they want to proceed on things that Donald Trump says he supports. Infrastructure, right? Doing things about health care to kind of shore up the system, which Donald Trump said in the State of the Union he wants to do. That's where Democrats campaigned on.
That was the plan, and then because there was no actual plan, Ocasio-Cortez came in, wrote a new platform for you guys, and is now holding you hostage. We'll have lots of time to talk about it. I just wanted to run that by you because I've been thinking about it today. But I want to ask you about Manafort. So the average rapist in this country gets 9.8 years in prison. Manafort is looking at 19 to 24. Do you think what Manafort did is twice as bad as rape?
So again, Dick Cheney said what the Russians did was an act of war. What Manafort did, the campaign chairman to Donald Trump, is he met as campaign chairman with a Russian spy, gave them the inside polling data, not, oh, we think we're going to win, but here's where we need help, which led the Russians to mount a campaign that very specifically targeted the very places that Manafort told them.
Wait, hold on, wait. Is he being charged for that? Oh, no, he's not. He's being charged for not registering under FARA, which, like, nobody does in Washington, as you know, including, I'm sure, half the people you know, and I know, they don't register under FARA.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, is this a little, like, you know every lobbyist in D.C. He's probably one of the sleaziest, I would think, Manafort. I doubt he's the sleaziest. 19 to 24 when your average rapist gets 9.8? I mean, can we be real here? Tony Podesta gets nothing? I mean, this is not equal application of the law, right?
Here's where you and I disagree. I think the public thinks that preserving the sanctity of the United States democracy actually matters a lot. And Paul Manafort took steps to undermine that. With the cahoots of who in the campaign? We don't know. We do know that Don Jr. and Kushner and all these people lied about their contacts with Russians. We know that.
Maybe he's mean to his wife, too, but he hasn't been charged for any of that. But hold on. If that really happened, why haven't we charged him with any of that?
We'll have to wait till the
Why are we putting him away for the rest of it? No, but when he's sentencing, he's coming up. He's not... Okay. All right.
Honestly,
I just think the guy's going to do life for, like, what everyone in our city does every day.
Look, defrauding people and bank fraud and so forth, what he did actually... Every lobbyist doesn't do that.
I agree. I have a lot to do, though, as you know. Richard, good to see you.
All right, take care.
Democrats used to have nuanced views on guns. It's Will in Venezuela. That team includes anchor Jorge Ramos. He's a frequent guest in this program. They traveled to the presidential palace in Caracas to interview the president. Apparently, they asked a question the president didn't like, and they were held. And I think they are still held. State Department says it has demanded the team's immediate release. We'll continue to monitor this story as it continues. Just a decade ago, it was possible to still find pro-gun Democrats. Kirsten Gillibrand claimed to be one of them. Now the party is dominated by anti-gun zealotry. This week, the House is scheduled to vote on a bill that would mandate background checks for all gun transfers. Excuse me, loan your gun to a nephew, sell one to your best friend. It could be a crime if this bill passes. Ryan Kleckner is a firearms attorney and a columnist at The Federalist, and he joins us tonight. So this, when they say background checks, Ryan, for all gun transfers, what does that cover?
Well, background checks, to back up a second, already happen at every single transaction in a gun shop or gun dealers across the country. When they're saying for all transactions, they're trying to include those private sales that might happen between residents of the same state. So, for example, friends selling each other guns or family members or things like that.
So that would basically ban, if I'm hunting with a friend or am at a gun range, I need the government's permission before any transfer takes place at all.
That's a good question.
Is there any evidence? Yeah.
They actually put an exemption in the bill for that. So whenever I hear about universal background checks, my immediate comebacks are, what about what you just brought up? Or what about somebody who might be suicidal and asks a friend to take their guns from them? Those are all the things that typically come up, and they came out with exemptions in this bill. But the problem I have with the bill is that it is entirely too burdensome on gun dealers, on individuals. I think it's the federal government sticking its nose in what might be a state's rights or state business issue. I think it's a big problem despite the family member issue.
Is there any evidence that this would prevent mass shootings? I mean, have we seen a spate of mass shootings where people avoided background checks? I mean, I don't think this is, from what I can tell, a driving factor in mass killings, is it?
You're absolutely right. Matter of fact, so currently the federal law says that any interstate between two states transfer of guns has to go through a gun dealer, and any sale through a gun dealer does the background checks. Well, we have almost half the states in our country. 20 states have extra restrictions that already require universal background checks in that state. And some of those states have already had the mass shootings. Like Connecticut, for example, has universal background checks in the state of Connecticut. Did nothing to stop Newtown. I went through and looked at the 12 biggest mass shootings that we've had since the federal background check system went into place, and not a single one of the 12 would have been prevented. We're talking Parkland, we're talking Newtown, we're talking San Bernardino, Fort Hood, the Orlando nightclub shooting, Aurora movie theaters, Las Vegas, every single one of these cases, the shooter, the murderer, the person that's to blame, bought the gun from a gun store and passed a background check, or in only a couple of those 12, they had somebody else buy the gun for them to completely circumvent the process, which means they would have done nothing to stop these past 12 that we had.
Then why do conservatives play along with this game? Democrats come out and they say, we want to make the country safer, we want common sense gun regulation. They make no attempt to disarm criminals. They make no attempt to tailor the laws and focus on the people who are actually committing the crimes. They're trying to disarm the population. They don't want middle America to have guns. Why don't we just say that out loud?
Maybe they should. We have one thing in common of every mass killing. I'm not just going to talk about mass shootings, but one thing in common with every mass killing is you have one evil person or more that is intent on killing innocent people. The tool can change one way or the other. That seems to be the focus of everyone here. But the problem is, this is a maxim. Every single call for gun control is also an admission that gun control doesn't work. Because every time we try and add new gun law, we have to ignore the fact that all the gun laws and all the laws that are already broken didn't stop the person. Murder didn't stop the person. Having a gun on a school zone didn't stop the person. Stealing a gun didn't stop the person. So by asking for something more, you have to admit that gun laws don't work.
So maybe people who believe in the Second Amendment should resist